pronouns. Gosh, I already regret making this video. Alright, so Undertale and Deltarune are beloved for many reasons. The characters are memorable and well written, the games deconstruct and subvert video game tropes, but those are topics for, let's just say, another day. Instead, we're going to look at the game's queer representation. Yes, the game where you literally have to bring together two separate gay couples to get the best ending as LGBTQ rep. I could end it right there, that says it all, but there's more. I mean, like, Deltarune's already setting up a relationship between Noelle and Susie, both METTATON and Mad Mew Mew have a lot of transcoding already, and then there's, well, the countless characters in the game, including all of the protagonists, that are likely non-binary, as they exclusively use they/them pronouns.
Where does it say that Kris is non-binary?
Nowhere. People are making assumptions based on a single interpretation of pronouns. It's more likely Kris' gender is up to interpretation.
Might imply Kris may not be, in fact, truly non-binary. It's
Kris, oh boy, I know I will get paid for saying this and downvoted to hell and possibly called a bigot, but it's got to be said. There is no proof that Kris is NB. None. This sub is according to books. Kris' gender is left unstated, meaning that they are not non-binary.
I shouldn't have to say this, but please, don't go out and target or harass anyone alluded to in this video. This may sound hard to believe, but I don't want to get into crappy drama with Redditors and Deltarune YouTubers who haven't made videos in 10 months and might have changed their views. Anyways, as you can tell, I have some strong feelings towards the gender discourse. I don't think it's some existential threat to the fandom that will destroy it or anything, but I still hate it. If the game is filled with so many lesbian, gay, and bisexual characters, then why is there such debate over the game's trans and non-binary representation, especially as Toby Fox has shown support for the trans community in the past? Yeah, but besides that, let's give people the benefit of the doubt after all. Well, Undertale and Deltarune's representation is more on the subtler, normalized end. Nobody says Alphys is bi, but she clearly has crushes on both Asgore and Undyne. Noelle never says, I'm a lesbian, but she clearly has a crush on Susie and becomes an adorable little mess whenever she's around her. So, how would the games handle the trans and enby representation? Well, for starters, the trans characters would have transitioned either before or during the story. Meanwhile, the enby characters would just avoid gender terminology and use they/them pronouns. Pretty simple, huh? Alright, slipping this into the video because I realized I should probably define my definition of, representation we're using in the VOC, as some people use different definitions. So, in this definition, I'm not just talking about, representing the experience of being trans or, the experience of being enby. Specifically, I'm talking about, for enbys, a character whose gender isn't in the gender binary, or for trans representation, a character whose gender changes across the story or before the story. Got it? We got it. Now let's continue this video. Well, here's the problem. Pronouns often just go over people's heads. As an example, here's the Outer Wilds. This section will contain minor spoilers for the story area, but I don't think anything in this section will ruin the blind experience, especially this one detail that will be brought up without this warning later in this video, which is that the Harfians are a genderless alien race that only uses they/them pronouns.
The bigger part was the idea of Harfians being without gender, since they are mineral beings, with the implication that they simply hatch or grow out. They don't specify as male or female, meaning the player will also never be referenced or approached specifically as male or female. We feel that the Harfians don't have a concept of gender for themselves, not considering themselves intergender or a specific new form. We wanted to avoid using disruptive or new language for them, since this is never specifically addressed or explained, and we didn't want players to be addressed in a gender identity that they don't feel comfortable with, when the more appropriate idea is that the player is interacting with a race that doesn't feel the need to address sex that way at all. The Harfians build their connection without gender, their friendships, and also their own identity. We hope that we were able to allow players to be part of their Outer Wilds venture in the same way.
However, I've seen a lot of video essays gender them anyway. Just to be clear, this isn't an attempt to call out these channels or whatever, I'm just pointing out that most people lack the gender radar. Besides, the Harfians' genderlessness wasn't really an attempt to comment on transness or gender identity. It was more done so as the hatchling is closer to the player surrogate blank slate side of the protagonist spectrum, and they didn't want the hatchling's gender to conflict with that of the players too much, so they just made it blank instead of giving you a gender selector. Unfortunately, Undertale and Deltarune lack official statements on these characters' genders, so they're either going to be heavily implied, coded, or all but stated to be trans or non-binary. At best, it will go over people's heads. At worst, people will start pulling Bridget guilty gears and start using their mental gymnastics to explain why Bridget is still a femboy even though she directly says,
Cowgirl is fine, because I'm a girl. Allow me to transfix you.
When there are no official statements, it leaves room for people to go like, oh, I had Ken Chara as a girl, and Kris as a boy, because we don't know for sure they are enby. Nobody tries to pull these stunts with the LGB characters, but when it comes to the T, that's when people suddenly start to make explanations for why they aren't the T. Other video games don't have this issue. You can't headcanon away in Stars and Times cast's genders, the characters' pronouns are on the Steam page. You can't take away Madeline's transness. Maddie literally wrote a blog where she literally says, well, of course she is trans. Even with Bridget, the devs had to come out and say, yes, she is indeed a trans girl, because for some reason, her directly saying, I am a girl, wasn't enough confirmation. Sure, all of these examples have in-text evidence, but out-of-text statements are needed to stop this nonsense when it's too subtle, even with Bridget Guilty Gear.
Oh, but don't you know, Legends of Localization confirms that every they them character is 100% ambiguous. They don't have canonical genders.
Alright, fine. You want to talk about Legends of Localization? Let's talk about Legends of Localization. Disclaimer. While editing this video, a statement from an individual has led to their name and most images from their posts being redacted to respect their wishes. This video was partly made to right the wrongs done against them, and I especially want to avoid inciting harassment towards them or inflicting any more mental distress. If you don't know who is, they used to run. Unfortunately, their old blog was deleted and they don't want people archiving their old stuff. Why is this the case? Well, they explain in this post that a combination of transphobic harassment from 4chan, general transphobia in the fandom, and people parading around Legends of Localizations as it supposedly proves that Undertale lacks any enby rep, all pushed them to leave. Apparently they are also controversial for a bunch of other crap outside the gender discourse, but that doesn't matter, especially as they deleted their entire blog because of all of this gender discourse mess.
Thinking about this fandom only makes me depressed and furious now. That's what the games have finally left on me. I have cut it fully out of my life.
I don't care if you disagree with some of their takes. They don't deserve to be driven to hate the franchise they used to love. But hey, according to these people, there's no room for debate. Legends of Localization fully confirms that these characters are ambiguous and have no canonical gender. Even seem kinda defeatist on the issue. I'm sure these people have actually read the book, right? Wouldn't it be horrible if this wasn't what Legends of Localization actually says and was pushed to leave by, at best, a fatally faulty reading that directly contradicts the game itself? Well, let's see what the book actually says.
Page 51. Although the main character's gender is left unstated in Undertale, the fan-made translation implies the character is male. Page 97. NAPSTABLOOK's identity was a concern for the localization staff. First, because the English script refers to NAPSTABLOOK as them rather than him or her, the localization team kept NAPSTABLOOK's gender unstated and unclear as much as possible in the Japanese script. Page 159. Monster Kid speaks like an energetic youth who loves to use slang. The translators preserved these attributes in Japanese, but this led to a problem. Monster Kid's gender is never specified in the original script, yet this Japanese speaking style makes the character sound like a teenage boy. After consulting with Toby, the translator gave Monster Kid the assertive, masculine pronoun Ori. Although Monster Kid uses the masculine pronoun, Ori, in Japanese, Toby designed the character to have no clear gender. Page 162. As with several other characters in Undertale, Onion-san's gender is meant to be unclear. As such, Onion-san usually uses the polite, somewhat gender-neutral Japanese pronoun watashi.
So, where's the part that directly says these characters' genders are ambiguous or up for interpretation? Because I don't really see it here. We are only told that these genders are unstated, unclear, or never specified in the script, not why that's the case. The word ambiguous is never used in the book when talking about these characters' genders, so if you're gonna say doesn't say they're enby, well, it doesn't say they're ambiguous either. Obviously, bisexuality is pretty uncommented upon. Unstated, as you will. How is this different? Chara's gender is never discussed in this book or on these pages, nor is Kris. It only discusses the 4 characters mentioned when we're looking at what the book actually says. And even then, the ambiguity argument doesn't work for all of these characters. How do I know this? Let's compare it with an actually ambiguous character, Nico from ONESHOT. The devs have officially confirmed Nico to be ambiguous, but here's the thing. Outside of their World Machine Edition profile in the game's trailers, Nico's pronouns are never used in-game. However, Everyone Nico meets in the game, they're meeting for the first time, so they can't know Nico's pronouns, and any they thems could be assumed to be like defaulting to that pronoun because they don't know Nico's actual pronouns. But if, say, Nico's mom ever referred to Nico with like any pronouns, that ambiguity would be gone because it would be absurd to assume that she doesn't know her own child's gender. Now, out of the 4 characters mentioned in Legends of Localization, are there any that can't fit into Nico's ambiguity? NAPSTABLOOK. NAPSTABLOOK's they-thems can't be explained by ambiguity, because here's METTATON, NAPSTABLOOK's own cousin, referring to them with they-them pronouns. Why would he not know their pronouns? He's their cousin, he used to live with them on the farm, and seeing as Legends of Localization uses similar language to describe the other, supposedly ambiguous characters, this leaves only 2 options. Option 1. The book is straight up wrong. Option 2. These pages aren't confirming ambiguity. Those who say otherwise are either parroting what they've heard on the internet, haven't thought about the issue, or are just making shit up.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
So, why was this language used? Not everyone was just parroting what they've heard. Some actually read the book and pulled ambiguity out of these words, even if I think the reading is a load of horse crap that directly contradicts the canon. So why was this vague, easily misinterpreted language used instead of something more explicit, especially after the damage it has done? Well, I have one theory that's based on something we already know is a fact. Toby Fox is scared of this fandom scale.
Do you think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
Toby's already expressed how overwhelming Undertale's popularity was. Why would he want to make a statement on any of the volatile aspects of the fandom? And I'm not even just talking about the gender discourse here. Remember how everyone thought that he hated MatPat because of that one tweet, even though he didn't? The language chosen was dancing around the issue, and it still caused all of this damage because people read in what they wanted to see. I understand where Toby's coming from, but there needs to be an actual statement seeing the damage that has been done. Alright, due to a certain other not-so-good video that will go unnamed, I feel like I need to clarify this point as I fear it could resemble some of the weird arguments from that video. Yes, it's not Toby Fox's fault that people got ambiguous gender out of this book due to a lack of media literacy and grasping at straws. However, as seen with Bridget and Guilty Gear, statements are needed to stop this nonsense. I'm not even asking for a lot. A Pride Month newsletter, FRISK being directly acknowledged as enby beyond just their pronouns. Just seriously, even a single tweet, just something so transphobes can shut the hell up and start complaining that the games have enby rep instead of trying to justify why they supposedly don't. It doesn't matter if it makes people complain that Toby Fox is woke. He already is. The Halloween hack was literally about internalized homophobia. Even if you're in the interpretive genders camp, don't you think there should be an actual clear-cut statement on the issue? Again, Legends of Localization isn't the great gender discourse slapback you think it is. It only poured more gasoline on the fire. Listen, I think most of the people who've paraded around Legends of Localization like some silver bullet don't know any better, but I don't want to cuddle you after the damage it has done. I get not everyone in the ambiguous camp is directly responsible for harassment, but some of you aren't helping because you can't shut up about the gender discourse. I get you're upset because you once were dogpiled for accidentally misgendering Kris or whatever, but maybe just correct yourself at your old posts, leave a pinned comment acknowledging the mistake, and move on from it. Getting on your high horse about it just makes you look like an ignorant person making a mountain out of a molehill. Saying, I don't care if these characters are enby or not, rings hollow, and you can't shut up about it. Maybe instead you should just talk to some actual trans or non-binary people so you know what you're saying isn't problematic. The ambiguous gender camp isn't innocent in the harassment department. In fact, this entire fandom has a harassment problem. This isn't just a gender discourse thing, so don't put the blame on the Rainbow Mafia. They aren't the source of this fandom's harassment issues, especially after what happened to. So, to strengthen this argument, we are going to look at all the counter-arguments against enby rep in Undertale and Deltarune. What other explanations for they them pronouns do we have besides a non-binary gender identity? I've already discussed the ambiguous argument, but honestly it's the only argument that has any ground at all. Saying you're supposed to see Kris as a blank slate because of their pronouns, or FRISK and Chara both use they them to highlight their different characters, doesn't debunk their enby identities. You just use a doylist out-of-universe explanation to debunk a Watsonian in-universe explanation. Again, back to the Outer Wilds. Sure, the devs said that the Harfian's genderlessness was done so the player wasn't addressed with any specific gender they weren't comfortable with, but that's the Doyleist explanation. The Watsonian explanation is the Harfians are a genderless alien race. Both are not contradictory. Cis people can also use they them, or they them isn't exclusive to embys isn't an answer either. Tell me, how many mythical cisgenders who exclusively use they them are there? Most people who use they them are, you guessed it, enby, and even for the cases of the mythical cisgender they them, their pronouns are still they them. Using he or she would be misgendering them. This is just Kris's enby with extra steps. If there's no evidence for multiple pronouns, then it's best to assume that the ones shown are their pronouns. Kris isn't just referred to with they them. They are exclusively referred to with they them. So it's more likely that Kris is enby, or that there's some boy or girl who just happens to avoid gender terminology while everyone exclusively refers to them with they them pronouns for no reason. So that just leaves the ambiguity reading, which only works when all the other characters don't know the ambiguous one's pronouns. METTATON refers to NAPSTABLOOK with they them pronouns. So if somebody's friend, relative, or anyone close refers to that character with they them, that would point towards a non-binary gender identity, because it would be absurd to assume that these characters wouldn't know the they them character's pronouns or gender. Maybe that character uses multiple pronouns, but if there's no evidence for that, well, then there's no evidence for that. The onus is to prove that character uses more than one pronoun. Still, there's one other counter-argument that needs to be tackled. Is a character enby if they're never referred to with pronouns? For example, here's Swatch. In the past, people thought Swatch was like non-binary or used they them, but in the game, they were never referred to with pronouns. So, when the Spamton sweepstakes came along, the Spamton Q&A confirmed that Swatch uses he/him because Spamton refers to him with he/him pronouns. This is like the only time the it's just a headcanon crowd was right. Sure, defaulting to they them is good when the identity or pronouns are not known, and for all we know, Swatch could be a he/they, and it's fine if you headcanon him as such, but the point is that when pronouns are unstated, that doesn't confirm an enby identity, again like Nico. However, Swatch's pronouns were confirmed out of text. Thus, if out of text information points towards they them pronouns or an enby gender identity, that would suggest that, you know, the character's non-binary. So, let's finally begin the analysis. I'll concede that FRISK is likely the strongest candidate for the genders up for interpretation camp. Every other character didn't know them before the game's events, so unless FRISK is wearing a they/them pronoun pin, all of the they/thems can be explained by the characters are defaulting to they/them because they don't know FRISK's actual pronouns. However, there isn't any evidence for FRISK's gender one way or the other in like a binary sense. In fact, this old post from Toby Fox describes FRISK's gender as androgynous.
Main character, young androgynous person who falls into the underground, and must use the powers of love to save the world.
FRISK also never corrects anyone on their pronouns, but to be fair, they also never tell people what their actual name is until Azriel asks them. There's also this sign on the door to Papyrus's room that says, "No boys, no girls, only Papyrus," which could imply that FRISK is non-binary, or it could just be a wacky one-off joke about those no girl signs that you would see on like a teenage boy's room or something. Papyrus doesn't stop FRISK and say, "Human, you shall not enter my room unless you're outside the gender binary," like some gender sphinx or whatever. Unfortunately, I have to talk about this tweet where Toby refers to FRISK with his, but here's the thing, the tweet is deleted. I don't know where it is on the Wayback Machine, but I found a screenshot on the out-of-context Toby Fox Twitter. I'll mention this later in the video, but Monster Kid's pronouns were corrected from he to they in the later versions of the art book, so seeing as this tweet is gone, I don't think this is evidence for FRISK's pronouns being he/him, especially with all the other stuff said in like Legends of Localizations and this tweet being deleted. Anyway, while I still see FRISK as non-binary, I admit there's still some room for them to be potentially ambiguous like Nico. Still, those who gender FRISK don't usually stop at FRISK. Even if they're potentially ambiguous, that doesn't mean that every other they/them character in the game is also ambiguous or up for interpretation. Case in point, here is Azriel, Chara's best friend and brother, referring to them with they/them pronouns. He also still uses these pronouns for Chara when he's Flowey if you talk to him after fighting Asgore a few times. Also in the Alarm Clock app, Toriel uses they/them for what's implied to be Chara, but Azriel DREEMURR's lines here should be enough to show Chara's preferred pronouns. He's their brother, he calls them their best friend, of course he'd know their gender or pronouns. Additionally, in the Geno route, Chara refers to himself as the demon that comes when you call its name, and the monsters in the New Home Walk refer to Chara with they and its pronouns. While the general dialogue could just be Chara demonizing and dehumanizing themselves after killing everyone, and the monster's dialogue could just reflect some distance from Chara if they don't even know their name, some NBs do use its pronouns, so this may suggest that Chara uses they, its. Now there's another counter-argument to tackle. To what extent are Chara and FRISK supposed to be stand-in for the player? Some people use this as an argument against NB rep for Chara and FRISK specifically. Well, we already went over this with the Outer Wilds. The Harfians are canonically genderless, but the main character is a blank slate. The same could apply to FRISK and Chara. Besides, the FRISK-Chara player trinity is a mess, and as much as I love Undertale, it's one of the game's greatest flaws, but to save time, we're not going to talk about that whole mess. Maybe watch Rosa Raid's Chara analysis if it's out by now. Minor spoilers for Earthbound and Mother Free. Some people compare naming Chara to naming yourself in those games, but here's the thing. Those games draw a line between yourself and the characters you control or play as. Sure, you can name Lucas or Ness after yourself, but the game still asks for your name separately and uses it for some fourth wall funkiness at near the end. This seems closer to how Deltarune handles things. You name the vessel and yourself separately. Meanwhile, Chara's name is closer to like naming Link in The Legend of Zelda. So yeah, are Chara and FRISK supposed to... I just noticed in the script that it says Chris. So yeah, are Chara and FRISK supposed to be blank slates for the player? Personally, I lean towards no, but they're already a mess. There isn't a gender slider for Chara, and sure, while a slider would have messed with the whole Chara-FRISK twist, that's a doyless explanation for why Chara and FRISK both share they them pronouns. Asriel still refers to their best friend with those pronouns, and the Watsonian explanation of their non-binary isn't debunked by the previously mentioned doyless explanation. But here's the thing, Chara's gender wasn't mentioned in Legends of Localization, so we have to move on to... Monster Kid's pronouns are only used once in the entirety of Undertale. If you call Undyne on the Waterfall Bridge, she refers to Monster Kid with them. While it's likely that Undyne knows Monster Kid's pronouns, I'll be fair and admit that maybe Undyne doesn't know them exactly and defaulted to they them. I think it's unlikely, but fine, it's plausible. However, as mentioned earlier, Monster Kid's pronouns were corrected from he, him to they, them in later editions of the Undertale art book. And before you start talking about Legends of Localization again, Japanese pronouns don't perfectly align with gender. For context, in Japanese there are multiple words for just I, with several different connotations. I'm not an expert in Japanese, I don't know the language, but this is what Legends of Localization says, so... Anyway, Monster Kid, as mentioned earlier in the quote, uses the ore pronoun that carries strong masculine connotations. But do you know who also uses ore? Susie! Does this mean that Susie is a man? No, she just uses it because it communicates how she's more masculine and aggressive than the other characters. Legends of Localization even highlights that girls occasionally use the ore pronoun, and the localization team was even in the past worried that people would mistake Susie for a boy because of the personal pronoun. Besides, the quote already highlighted the suggested ore pronoun was picked for personality reasons, not gender reasons. Still, everyone mentioned in Legends of Localization so far can hypothetically fit into the ambiguous Nico category. The next section will kill this reading forever. I have already told you why ambiguity can't work for NAPSTABLOOK, but beyond METTATON, Undyne, Papyrus, and the narrator all use NAPSTABLOOK's pronouns, which are they, them, along with Alphys in the Alarm Clock app, and Madame Mew Mew and Deltarune. Because METTATON and Madame Mew Mew are NAPSTABLOOK's cousins, they would know NAPSTABLOOK's pronouns and gender. Again, you can't have a character with an ambiguous gender when other characters would know that gender. Additionally, the ghost monsters add another bit to canonical trance and MB rep. METTATON wasn't always a sexy robot man. He used to be a ghost who lived with NAPSTABLOOK on their snail farm. In his old house, we can read a few of his old diary entries from before he became METTATON, and yes, this is indeed his house. He recognizes the key. Anyway, in Undertale's lore, ghosts can become corporeal by fusing with inanimate objects, usually a training dummy. However, in these diaries, METTATON explains how he can't find a body he'd want until Alphys shows him blueprints for a new body, which, eventually becomes the METTATON body, saying how he could finally feel like himself. I don't think I need to explain the transcoding in these lines. It's almost like it's an allegory or something. For ghosts, genderless they/them is the default, suggesting that these they/them pronouns for the ghosts aren't because they're ambiguous, but because ghosts don't have any default gender, like the Harfians we discussed earlier. Obviously, this isn't 100% comparable to a trans man's experience. Trans men aren't genderless ghosts, the sexy robot man, but there's a transition involved here. If you've seen Star Trek The Next Generation, well, it's like the episode The Outcast, minor spoilers, where we have this genderless alien race. However, one of these aliens secretly feels like she's a woman and must repress these feelings because her culture sees it as some deviation that must be cured.
And some have urges to be female. I am one of the latter.
I wonder if this has any real-world parallels, huh? Unfortunately, Legends of Localization doesn't really talk about diaries, so I had to ask some people on Molly Star's server for help, and got a lot of help from Catticus. Give them thanks, by the way. For a reminder, I don't know Japanese. Catticus says they're not an expert, so you know, that's the disclaimer. Anyway, throughout most of Undertale and Deltarune, METTATON uses the Boku pronoun, even in his diaries that would have been before he transitioned. Legends of Localization describes Boku as having a friendly, boyish vibe. However, his diaries also use the Jibun pronoun. As we discussed earlier with Susie, pronouns don't directly point to a gender identity, hence the use of Boku in his diaries likely just means that METTATON saw himself as a pretty boyish ghost before he transitioned. In contrast, Jibun is a more neutral pronoun. Again, we're not experts here, but this points towards METTATON's pre-transition identity being more in the genderless category. Yeah, I did some more research and I don't think this line probably points towards METTATON's pre-transition gender. You see, the word Jibun means like also myself or yourself or stuff like that. So, seeing as this is a line where METTATON says how he could finally feel like himself, well, you can probably understand why the word was chosen, so yeah, this point sucks, I'm sorry. Additionally, while Undyne doesn't know that METTATON was NAPSTABLOOK's cousin, she knew him before he became METTATON, and thus refers to the pre-transition METTATON with they/them pronouns, because she doesn't know that he's METTATON. If NAPSTABLOOK's gender was ambiguous, it would mess with the whole trans allegory we have with METTATON. Though I'll be fair, maybe she just doesn't know METTATON's pre-transition pronouns because she doesn't even know his name from back then. And you could argue the whole ghosts are genderless, is fandom, and METTATON is not trans, if we didn't have stronger evidence from... This is Mad Dummy. Here the narration refers to the character with they/them pronouns. Here is Mad Mew Mew. She's the same character, it's just that she only pops up in the Switch version boss fight and the Xbox version. Here's the important thing though. The narration now refers to her with she, her. The character's pronouns changed. Sure, if you believe in the Nara Kara theory, you could explain it as, oh, Kara just doesn't know her pronouns until she possessed a Mad Mew Mew body in the footage of they/them. But as much as I love Nara Kara, the narration already has some mind-reading funkiness. I don't know how else to explain it, other than maybe it's similar to how we can read the minds of Noelle and Susie and Deltarune, but if the narration can somehow read Papyrus's thoughts, I don't see it as a stretch for it to somehow know Mad Mew Mew's new pronouns. Dork already talked about Mad Mew Mew's transcoding, so go watch her video, but I will summarize a little bit of it here by quoting her a bit. Alright, never mind, not reading out the quotes, let's just say I did that and...
Once like you, with this perfect new body.
Let's just say let's not listen to that, because it's kind of cringy. Instead, I'm just going to describe them in bullet points, where she, she describes the Mew Mew body as perfect. She says that it's me, me, me. She constantly talks about how wonderful life will be after fusing with the body. Then there's the Xbox version, which is way more explicit with the transcoding. I love this body, so there's no way I'm going back. As a trans woman who's been on HRT for almost a year and a half, this is exactly how I feel. How is this not transcoded? Also, no. Saying she just possessed a Mad Mew Mew body so Undyne would love her contradicts every other line we've already discussed and honestly gives some yikes vibes. If she possessed a body for Undyne, why didn't she just ditch it upon realizing that Undyne was interested in someone else, especially as she says she'll support their relationship? Most of her dialogue just reinforces how she loves her new body, so she didn't just transition for Undyne's attraction, for goodness sake. Don't reduce her character like that. Maybe we shouldn't suggest that the transcoded anime girl only became girl so another girl would like her. As a trans woman, this kind of gives me some uncomfortable transphobic undertones, resembling TERF arguments that were just straight men who want to f lesbians or whatever. Anyway, Catticus says that in the Japanese localization, Mad Mew Mew uses the ore pronoun throughout the game, like before and after the anime cat girl transition, but as we discussed earlier, this doesn't point towards a gender, especially as the narration still refers to her as she, her during the Switch Edition fight. Knowing as her name is Mad Mew Mew, I think the pronoun was chosen to convey her anger and aggression. If gender is supposed to be interpretive, then what's going on with Mad Mew Mew here? Both METTATON, Mad Mew Mew, and NAPSTABLOOK all collectively contradict the ambiguous gender reading. The game's canon supersedes the stupid book. NAPSTABLOOK's VEVEMs can be explained by their cousin knowing their pronouns, while METTATON, Mad Mew Mew go from no gender to sexy robot man and anime cat girl. Ambiguity doesn't work here. Let me remind you that this faulty paper thin reading pushed someone to hate the series they used to love. If there's one thing I want to come out of this video, is that I never want to hear anybody taking this stupid reading of Legends of Localization seriously. It directly contradicts the canon, and after the damage it's done, I never want to hear the words Legends of Localization proves that these characters are ambiguous, because as we've shown, it doesn't. The Dress Lion is one of Undertale's minor side characters. Here, they are wearing some masculine clothing, but near the end of the pacifist route, they change into a dress after METTATON gives them it. Additionally, they still wear a dress in Deltarune when they are working as a waitress for QCs. According to Catticus, the Japanese localization has the Dress Lion refer to themselves with Boku both before and after they get the dress. As we discussed earlier, personal pronouns don't perfectly align with gender, so even though we don't know their pronouns in English, Boku doesn't automatically mean that the Dress Lion is a guy, especially with the waitress comment. Besides, they may have dropped it after, getting the dress. Still, there's enough wiggle room that I could see the Dress Lion either being a gender non-conforming man who's fine with wearing dresses, or a trans woman, which is why I've defaulted to they them for this section. The waitress comment in Deltarune could just be the couple assuming the Dress Lion's gender, but again, they're still presenting femme and don't seem bothered by it. If we get a pronoun in Deltarune later, that might point to their gender one way or another, but currently it's still up in the air, and it's fine if folks headcanon this lion as a trans woman. Though please, for the love of God, if it's confirmed that the Dress Lion is a trans woman, don't throw a tantrum because Toby Fox is taking away your femboys. METTATON is right there! Okay, time for the miscellaneous lightning round that probably won't be very fast. First, we have the 6 previous humans, which we don't know anything about other than their character trait and some items associated with them. We don't know their pronouns or identities. Sure, Integrity had a tutu, but all that suggests is that Integrity was femme-presenting. Because we don't know anything about these characters, feel free to headcanon them with whatever genders you want. Just don't throw a tantrum if somebody headcanons them as non-binary, they, them, or something. Ice Wolf refers to themselves with they, them pronouns, but that's all we've got. And we've already talked about Onion Sans earlier as being one of several other characters who have an unstated gender. Still, their pronouns are never used in the game, so they potentially have room to be ambiguous again. But again, Legends of Localization does not confirm ambiguity. I already quoted what it said about their personal pronouns in Japanese, so I'm just gonna skip ahead. By the way, while looking at the page where it talks about Onion San, it refers to them with his, but I think this is likely a mistake, like the Monster Kid example from earlier versions of the art book. How can they have an unstated gender and yet have a his pronoun? If anyone has a later version of the book with a revised pronoun fixed here, please let me know, because I can't find one yet, but I'm guessing it is, because why would it be his if it's supposed to be unstated? Mad Mew Mew, back when she was Mad Dummy, refers to the Ruins Dummy with they them pronouns, and seeing as she's their cousin, you'd think she'd know their identity. Well, admittedly she forgets their name, but, I don't think she'd forget their gender, especially with the previously established all ghost monsters are assigned genderless at birth thing. Though for all we know, maybe the Ruins Dummy is just NAPSTABLOOK briefly possessing a dummy or something. Oh, and I nearly forgot about the River Person, who in their introduction says, I am the River Man, or am I the River Woman? It doesn't really matter, which is cryptic, but it could be used to argue that they're enby or something. This is probably the closest statement we're gonna get on these they them characters. Anyway, that's everybody in Undertale, but now it's time to move on to Deltarune, which might have less characters, but let's just say one of them's gonna have a really long section. Now, it's time for the one and only... Now, let's first look at Chapter 1. How many times are they referred to with pronouns? Wait, only once? By Susie? During like the dungeon cutscene before she fights Lancer? Huh, I thought there would be more. There's also some unused dialogue where Rousey refers to Kris with they them pronouns, but you know, it's unused, so I don't think we can really use it. Sure, Susie might know how Kris identifies, but we only have one chapter here, and we don't know how long she's been in Hometown, or her past with Kris. And even then, I could see people arguing, Susie may is using a plural way to refer to Kris and Rousey, so I guess we'll have to look to chapter 2 and... Oh, that's a lot of pronouns. Alright, let's see who we have here. Toriel, Kris's mom. Noelle, Kris's childhood friend. Wow, she uses their pronouns a lot. Alphys, Kris's high school teacher. Rousey, even the gamer himself, Burley, refers to Kris with they them pronouns. Susie also continues to they them Kris throughout chapter 2, and with the context of all the other characters and expansion sweepstakes, I think it's safe to assume that she knows their pronouns, especially as they're best friends now. Out of all the characters we've discussed so far, Kris has the strongest evidence for their non-binary identity. Every character who refers to them with pronouns likely knows their identity, and thus aren't defaulting to they them to like assumed pronouns. Except for maybe Rousey, though honestly I doubt he's just assuming Kris's pronouns. He already knows their name due to the whole prophecy fiasco, he resembles Azriel, his name's an anagram for Azriel, something funky is going on, but what Rousey is still a mystery until future chapters. If Rousey is like a personification of Kris's familial love for their brother, he'd likely know their pronouns. Additionally, Toby corrected Kris's pronouns on the 6th anniversary livestream, so that's another point towards Kris's identity.
They probably are thirsty.
It's been a long stream. They're very thirsty. And I don't think that sync worked. Kris, can you reach it?
He's stuck in a
He's stuck in a cutscene. You can't do it.
Kris cannot reach it.
They can't do it.
They're stuck. This is punishment.
What is Kris? We'll never know what they're being punished for.
Here you go. Now,
I didn't call mom before.
I like Noelle comes by and like.
Go!
Still, despite being the strongest case so far, some people still for some reason have counter-arguments that need to be tackled. First, there's some dialogue like Lancer's cookie and wife line, and 2 instances of the phrase boys and girls. One from Lancer, and one from Jevo that's... First, both are such isolated lines that I think they can be dismissed as jokes or just irrelevant. If we're going to dismiss Papyrus's... then we can dismiss these 2 other counter-arguments. Besides, for the Lancer's cookie and wife line, for all we know, Kris could be the cookie and the cookie could be the wife. This is Lancer we're talking about after all. And for the 2 instances of boys and girls, well, for all we know, this could just be the common phrase instead of some enby-inclusive alternative. If someone refers to a group as boys and girls, and that group contains an enby, is the enby suddenly not non-binary anymore? No, they aren't. Then there's the most masculinely gendered bottle of Icy's body spray, which some use as evidence for Kris being a boy, but there's some problems with this. First, this could just be Azriel's body spray. It's mostly a full, implying it hasn't been used in a while, which would make sense seeing as Azriel's away at college. He's also friends with Pizza Pants, who works at IC's. Even if this body spray is somehow Kris's, well, it's still unused. You have to ask this question, why would an enby child want to try on a can of Icy's Cool Boys body spray for the boys flaming hot pizza flavor? No, they wouldn't. Other arguments don't make sense. Another hymn is way more likely to be about Gaster, seeing as the Goner Maker section is spoken by a character who sounds a lot like Gaster. And Kris is a boy because they're blue honestly just sounds like a joke. Just to be clear, the issue here isn't with people not noticing that Kris is non-binary or like mistakenly misgendering them. The issue is when it's intentional or people just try mental gymnastics their way to explain why Kris is not non-binary. They even pronouns is actually plural in this case because you're possessing Kris doesn't make sense because nobody knows that Kris is possessed by you except for Kris, Rousey, and maybe Noelle and the Snow Grapefruit. We already have so much strong evidence for Kris's non-binary identity, but there's another argument that strengthens it even more. Because if Kris's gender was ambiguous, it would completely mess up the game's themes, because you are not Kris. Sure, at the start you're supposed to think they're a blank slate, but guess what? That's the twist, that you're not Kris. This is basic Deltarune lore at this point. Noelle notices if you pick choices that seem out of character for Kris. Kris's tone changes depending on our choices, which sometimes hints to which choice they would actually prefer to have. Then there's everything in the Snow Grapefruit. Oh, and of course, how they rip out their own soul. During the first cutscene when this happens, notice how the soul is shaking around in the cage? That's because we are controlling it. You are not Kris. You are a separate entity that's controlling them against their will. Oh, but Kris's they/thems might be used to hide that we are not Kris, and I already told you, giving a doyelist explanation for Kris's pronouns doesn't debunk their enby identity. You still need a Watsonian explanation for why they're exclusively referred to with they/them. Honestly, I think there's a pretty strong argument that the game wants you to think their gender is ambiguous at first, only to later reveal they're non-binary with the whole "you are not Kris" thing. I mean, again, their pronouns aren't really used until Chapter 2 when they're all over the place. Wait a second, let's return to that first pronoun. Notice how this cutscene is from Susie's perspective. Well, when we return back to Kris and Rouse, it's implied that they were having a little conversation while we weren't watching. A similar thing happens in Chapter 2 during the Suzel Ferris wheel ride. Notice how these conversations happen when we're not here, and how the first time this happened was also the first time Kris's pronouns were used. Do I need to spell it out for you? One of the earliest scenes hinting that Kris is non-binary is also one of the earliest scenes to hint that we are not Kris. I honestly think this could be intentional. This could also explain the previously cut they/them, but the cutting room floor says that's also because it was from the cut dialogue option. Also, before you point to Nico from ONESHOT as another example of a player-protagonist split where an ambiguous gender still exists, I already mentioned how Nico's gender is not something that fits for these characters, like Kris. Again, these they/thems can't be explained by ambiguity, because how would Torio not know her own child's gender? Like Swatch, themes pronouns aren't used anywhere in the game yet. However, unlike Swatch, there's evidence pointing towards a non-binary identity. In the 6th anniversary livestream, Toby corrects themes pronouns to they/them.
I really like Sham's eye.
Yeah.
Like the way that his little button smiles with him.
He's got just he's like torn up.
Yeah,
in
if you leave
the
it on the
perfect
idle,
way.
it spins around. They are good character.
Yeah.
This suggests that the reason we haven't seen themes pronouns is just because they're in a shop menu and thus there isn't a third character to use them. And I forgot to record audio for Sham's section for the Japanese pronouns, which was where I originally accidentally misgendered theme in an earlier drafted script. Oof. Anyway, Sham mostly uses the atashi pronoun, which in Japanese is more feminine, is mostly used by girls. However, we've already discussed the whole gender in Japanese pronouns thing and how they don't always align. On the screen are several different examples of other explanations for the atashi pronoun. And we've got another last minute section which I'm going to try and make quick. Okay, first of all, the 9th anniversary newsletter implies that the hacker guy uses they/them. Though this is like an early draft, so I don't know what to make of it. It could mean that the hacker guy is enby, or it could just be an early draft, things could change, And then there's this tweet where Temmie refers to Jevil with they/them pronouns. We already know that Jevil uses he, him, so this might imply that Jevil is a he, they, Sifrin. But, there's two Jevils in this picture, so maybe she's just using they/them to refer to, the plural they. Anyway, let's just get back to the video because I don't want this to go any longer. We don't know who the Roaring Knight is, so while they use they, its pronouns, this is likely just the Darkners assuming as they don't know who the Knight is. These Darkners don't even know the Knight's motives, so I doubt they know their pronouns unless every time the Knight opens a Dark Fountain, they yell, "I'm the Roaring Knight, use they, it," and then refuse to elaborate. If we know the Knight's pronouns, that would eliminate candidates, so keeping them unknown currently preserves the mystery. When the Valentine's newsletter dropped, we learned names for these Darkners revealed in a Spanton sweepstakes, LANINO and ELNINA. These names are a play on the El Nino and La Nina weather patterns, but we've already got some gender funkiness. El Nino means the boy while La Nina means the girl, but for these Darkners, the masculine El and feminine La are swapped. So, we literally have the girl, masculine, and the boy, feminine. Still, we don't know their pronouns, so... That's right! This video took so long to make that the newsletter dropped and I had to do some rewrites. Anyway, the newsletter revealed some screenshots of the localization, and as we can see, ELNINA is the weather girl. Still, we'll figure out how this will work in Chapter 3, as all we know is that El Nino and La Nina are deeply in love, which might be awkward for Torio because it's a whole divorce. Anyway, that should be the video, but I already know one other argument that was thrown against because people accuse them of being too attached to their headcanons, and that's why they insist on these characters being they, them, enby. And if you look at my profile pic, I think I can know one of those arguments, so I guess we have to talk about... Yes, I headcanon Noelle as trans, but no, her situation is not comparable to these characters' canonical pronouns. So far, it's just a headcanon, and if you think Noelle is a cis woman, that's fine. Unlike the characters we discussed, there isn't any solid evidence for or against Noelle's trans identity. Sure, Noelle's room has some unused sprite stuff like pill bottles, but first, these are unused, and second, they could be anything. This could be her HRT medication, or they could be antidepressants, ADHD meds, anxiety meds, maybe even medicine for her dad. This is based on her search results after all. Then, there's the antler discourse. I have some feelings regarding the antler discourse that aren't as strong. First, it assumes that deer monsters follow the same rules as real deer, and second, it assumes Noelle is a deer and not a reindeer. Both male and female reindeer have antlers, and while these antlers are grown and shed at different times of the year, the thing that determines that is likely hormones. If Noelle was on HRT, she'd likely shed her antlers around the same time as other reindeer girls. And if Death or Noelle's mom have antlers, we'll learn that you can't discover a reindeer's assigned gender from their antlers. Unused sprites, or speculation based on deer biology that might not be applicable to anthropomorphic deer people, isn't comparable to a character's canonical pronouns. I just like the headcanon because it makes Noelle and Kris trans besties, and not because of her flipping antlers. It would be cool if it's confirmed, but I can live with it in the headcanon zone. Now, it's time for the... So, I hope I've shown why we aren't using questionable logic to justify these characters' identities. Most of these characters can't be explained with ambiguity unless you count all of the previous 6 humans individually. But that's stupid, these aren't characters. So if we filter out all the minor characters or the characters that are like, could change their status, well, you don't have a lot of ambiguity. You are only left with FRISK and maybe Monster Kid, and even if these characters could be explained with ambiguity, doesn't it make more sense if they weren't? Seeing as everyone else can't be explained with ambiguity, sure, it's possible, but why would FRISK and Monster Kid be the odd ones out here, huh? Anyway, this was a transbian YouTuber with a trans Noelle profile pic who thought the first video essay she should make should be on the heated and controversial gender discourse. Yeah, this was a terrible idea. I'm painting a target on my back here, but I still think it's an important video because as bummed out as I was reading why I left post, it also made me determined to make this video. I doubt you're watching this wherever you are, but I'm sorry people are I hope you're in a better place now. Anyway, this was my first video essay. I hope you like it. If you want to see some other stuff that's more active, I make fanfiction on Nail Free, and I have a Tumblr account that just reblogs random Deltarune posts. Maybe in the future I'll make a video essay that's less volatile like this. In the meantime, maybe look at Shadow of Roserade's old Queer Joy video, as it kinda covers the same ground as this video. Also sources in the description, obviously.